During this great NHL season, we have seen far too many players not getting the recognition that they deserve. But ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to correct that. I'm going to be going through all 32 NHL teams this season to decide who has been the most underrated on each of them. We're going to be going through some great players that don't get the recognition they deserve, but also some players you might not have expected were doing so well. So make sure you watch till the end as we go through every single team and your favorite team's most underrated player league-wide, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey rankings just like this all throughout the year. So much content, especially with the playoffs coming up this year, that you won't want to miss. Now, starting us out in today's rankings, we're going to go into the Anaheim Ducks, who have quite a few good options here. If this was maybe a month ago, I would have absolutely said Jackson Lacombe, who has been terrific this season for Anaheim, playing top pair minutes and really exceeding in them, 35 points in 60 games. But I think he's gotten a lot more recognition as of late from me and a lot of other people, so I don't know if he's quite as underrated as he was now. My pick is actually going to go to an interesting one here, and a player I wasn't expecting to do so well in John Gibson, who I think, because he's always been in trade rumors and just never really has felt settled in an Anaheim system, has kind of been underrated because of it. But you look at what he's been able to do this season, and he's having a solid year. In 26 games in a backup role behind Dostal, he has a 2.82 goals against average and a .910 save percentage, which is his best year since 2019. I think in Gibson's case, the fact that we have a player like Lucas Dostal who's coming as the true starter for that Ducks team has almost made Gibson a little bit better this season, playing against lesser teams, more sheltered minutes, and I think that has been good for him. I think he can still be a starter, and he's having a solid year, but I would like to see him continue being a fringe backup goaltender, because at this point it seems like that's what's best for him. Now, I did want to mention before we go further into this video that this is just about this year and the most underrated players this season, not over the last 10 years, the last 3 years, just this year, which is a big reason why when we go to the Boston Bruins, my pick has to be Morgan Geekie, who has been really a revelation and one of the only true bright spots for this Bruins team this year. You can see at 26 years old, he's bopped between different organizations, whether it be Carolina, Seattle, and now with the Boston Bruins, but he's really showing what he's made of this season, especially in the goal scoring department. You can see in 64 games, he has 23 goals, 14 assists, 37 points. I think he's truly broken out in a major way and is just playing more minutes and in better situations than he's ever had before. In Geekie's case, I think he's been more aggressive, he's been more involved in the play and more fast in every single direction, which I think has really helped his game. The confidence also has been a pretty massive booster too, and it looks to be a big part of this Bruins future. Now we move on to the Buffalo Sabres and go on to a team that, of course, like the Bruins, has a lot of disappointment this season. Not a lot of players that I think are truly underrated, but I do think one player fits this bill pretty perfectly, and that is Ryan McLeod. I think he's always been a bit underrated, especially when we had the Matthew Savoy trade and so many people saying it was an absolute steal for the Edmonton Oilers, and maybe that still could end up the case as Savoy transitions onto the NHL level, but McLeod is still a solid player, and I think has shown that in his time in the NHL. Obviously, the speed was the most evident part about his game, but I think especially this year with Buffalo, he's showing he's a lot more than that. You can see in 63 games this year, 15 goals, 22 assists for 37 points, obviously on pace for a career high in points totals, but he's somebody that in terms of the actual play at hand here, not just with the speed, but the creativity, the playmaking, the confidence defensively, I think he's somebody that is just a really helpful support player, just somebody that as a bottom six center is absolutely perfect for that role, and especially early on in the season was one of the only Buffalo players really producing. Especially for a team like Buffalo, you need a player like McLeod who's putting in the speed, putting in the intensity, because it is few and far between. McLeod has been a vital source of energy there, and hopefully one that can bring them to the promised land eventually. Next up, let's go on to the Calgary Flames, and with their playoff contention this year, they have quite a few players that I would say are underrated. I would still kind of say that Dustin Wolf, even though he's been getting more attention as of late, is still an extremely underrated prospect and player, especially in the Calder Trophy discussions. But to me, I think I have to go with Matt Coronato, who has really been a big breakout star for the Flames this year. In terms of the point totals, it's not anything overwhelming, but in 61 games, he has 16 goals, 17 assists for 33 points, is really finding that offensive game, but I think most importantly as well, he's finding that overall effort, that defensive ability, which is something that hasn't quite appeared before. With Coronato, he's always been a great goal scorer, somebody that's always been able to find shooting lanes and find success at it, and he's been able to transition that onto the NHL, but I also think the playmaking and the diversity in his game has been a major improvement. He's a lot less one-dimensional offensively, and that's allowed the Flames, especially with whoever he plays with, to have a lot more breathing room. I think in Coronato's case, he's really shown up to be a big part of this Flames future, and to me, a top 6 player as well going forward. Next up, we go into the Carolina Hurricanes, and could I be here all day? I mean, they have so many players that are often underrated. Seth Jarvis still doesn't get the recognition he deserves. Jackson Blake has been a phenomenal rookie. Jordan Martinook is just an unbelievable two-way player. And a player like Eric Robinson as well, I think, is just completely shafted in terms of the Carolina scoring discussion. He has been awesome there. But to me, somebody that's just been phenomenal for the Canes and just continues to put up the offense on the back end that they need is Shane Gostisbehere. And it's interesting that with his career and how it's been, because he's gone from team to team, from location to location, has never really stuck. But I feel like whenever he's been with Carolina, he's often been a pretty good offensive producer. And you can see so far in 59 games this year, he has 7 goals, 30 assists, 37 points, has been critical, of course, on the power play. But I think offensively and in his overall game has been having the best year of his career. He's somebody that has just been so influential, so good for that Carolina team. And I don't know where they would be offensively without him. You have guys like Brent Burns, but they're not obviously close to the prime of their careers. In Gostisbehere's case, though, I think he's really been carrying the load of the puck movement, of the carrying for this Canes team, which is often so important for their system. Now let's advance on to the Chicago Blackhawks, who I think have a couple of interesting options, but to me, if we're looking at the most underrated, to me, it's nowhere close. He's honestly having one of the most underrated seasons in the NHL league-wide, and that is Teuvo Teravainen, who I don't think you would expect to be as consistently good, especially recently, as he has been. You can see in 67 games, he has 15 goals, 37 assists for 52 points, which on the Chicago Blackhawks is basically McDavid numbers. It's especially impressive when you consider how good he's been since February 1st, for example. He's 29th in league scoring with 18 points in 16 games, and that's in the same range as players like Suzuki, Reinhart, Rupe, Hintz. A pretty good crop there. Yet Teravainen, especially with the options he has, not playing with a guy like Connor Bedard, has been really impactful. And you also consider how good defensively he's been, how sharp his instincts have always been with Carolina and now with Chicago, and he's somebody that I think honestly has been the most impactful Chicago forward in all situations, and I would really be scared to know where Chicago would be without it. Now going on to another supreme defensive Finn, let's go on to the Colorado Avalanche, who I think have a couple options here, but to me I have to give my respects to my boy Joel Ranta, who just continues to do his thing in the NHL, and I love to see it, and with a bit of a goal-scoring tinge as well this year. You can see in 68 games this year for the Avs, 15 goals, 6 assists for 21 points, on pace for by far a career year in the NHL, especially in the goal-scoring department. The opportunistic play, of course, has been there, but it always is fed through his unbelievable hockey sense defensively. He is somebody that is just always in the right places at the right times, stopping plays in their tracks, and just making sure the play goes in the right direction. And for the Avs, he's always been doing that in a bottom six role, whether that be for the Avs or the Stars. This year, though, the goal scoring especially, I think is getting unnoticed because it's been a pretty big part of that Avs offense, and underratedly so. Now we move on to the Columbus Blue Jackets and go on to a waiver claim from earlier this season in Dante Fabro, who I mentioned in my top free agents video if you want to go check that out with the rankings there. In Fabro's case, I think he could definitely get paid this offseason with how young he is, how impactful he's been for this Columbus team. You look at what he's been able to do in the 48 games since he went from Nashville to Columbus. After going from 0 points in 6 games, he has 16 points in 48 games and is playing a pretty massive role, has been improved defensively, has been stepping up in the play, and coming up in the right moments offensively. I don't think he's been extraordinary or anything, but he's living out to his potential with the Blue Jackets and playing more minutes than he was with Nashville, getting more confidence, and that has really allowed his game to soar. Now we move on to my favorite team in the Dallas Stars, and I could probably go out there and tell you pretty much every single player on the team is underrated in my opinion. I could go through a Harley, I could go for an Evgeny Dadonov, I could go for a Wyatt Johnston, but today I'm going to go with a player that I just don't think gets as much credit as he needs to offensively, and that is Matt Duchene, who I think has been a true carrier for this Stars offense ever since he arrived, making so much less money than he really should be, in all honesty. You can see what he's been able to do for the Stars since he arrived last year. He got 65 points in 80 games, but this season, I think he's truly elevated to a next level. He's over a point per game, 41 assists, 67 points in 66 games, especially earlier on in the season when Sagan and Marchment were both healthy and on his line. That was one of the best lines in the NHL. I will die by that hill. He is somebody that's just been a supreme creator, has been jumping into the play so perfectly. The offense, the playmaking, the creativity, it's all been at a sky-high level and has been so important, especially earlier on in the season when players like Robertson and Hintz were trying to get going. In Duchene's case, he arrived on day one and was ready to play. Now we go on to the Detroit Red Wings and go on to a really fascinating rookie in this class, especially since the turn of the year. He has been excellent in Marco Kasper. And really, Kasper is doing what I expected him to do at the NHL level. Just being an absolute dog out there, the forechecking, the physicality, just having so much energy. And that is what he's been doing for this Detroit team. Now, to start things out, he was mainly on the bottom six, on the fourth line, which I just don't think was really the best way to utilize his skills. I always saw him as this perfect complementary player on a top six that would be able to get the most and do the dirty work to be able to create for some of the star players around him. And in Detroit, he's been doing exactly that, a lot, especially recently, playing in that top six. And you can see in 62 games this year, 13 goals, 14 assists, 27 points, a lot of those points coming within the last couple of months, and that confidence has been sky high. He's been one of the Detroit's best producers, especially since the coaching change, and I think deserves a lot more credit for it. Now, I'm going to move on to the Edmonton Oilers, and this might be one of the more surprising picks in today's video, but I'm going to go with Darnell Nurse. Now, underrated might not be the right word, it might be more overhated, but I think in Darnell Nurse's case, he's been having a pretty solid year, and is somebody that in 62 games this year, 24 points, is never going to be an unreal producer, even though the goal scoring, I think, has potential. I think in Nurse's case, he's been fine in all categories, but I think kind of gets overhated because of the contract there. Pretty similar situation, I would say, to Seth Jones of now the Florida Panthers, where the contract was just so overwhelming that it just kind of casts too much of an attention on him. I think in Nurse's case especially, that has really hurt the perception around him, because he's a solid middle pair defenseman, I would say, who's getting paid as a number one, and unfortunately so. Now we move on to the defending Stanley Cup champs in the Florida Panthers, and I think a pretty underrated reason why they've been solid this year has been some of the improvements in the youth. Players like Jesper Bohlquist have been playing some pretty major roles, and I want to give a major shout out here to Mackie Simaskevich, former Michigan player here, who's been, I think, really underrated as a rookie this season for Florida. You can see in 59 games this year, 13 goals, 12 assists, 25 points. Offensively, he's been producing in the right ways, and a lot of that as well throughout the season being on a fourth line role. He's been playing more as of late, which I think is deserved, but I think in Simaskevich's case, he's finding that overall game. It's been improving throughout the year, and I think he's somebody that's just been driving such good results that Florida has had to play him and as well keep him at the deadline. I thought, especially in the Brad Marchand trade as it was developing, a player like Simaskevich would have had to be a part of the deal, but it seems like Florida really made sure he stayed, and it's a good thing too, because he is somebody that has been really impactful for Florida and a good part of that future as well. Now we go to the LA Kings, and they have quite a few options as well that I wanted to include in today's video. Warren Fogle has been really good this season. Brant Clark has been way better than the Kings even give him credit for, but I think I have to go with this player, and that is Darcy Kuemper. Of course, a part of the major Pierre-Luc Dubois-Kuemper 1-for-1 trade. He was somebody that I think a lot of people kind of forgot about in that deal, and especially with Dubois being as good as he has been for the Caps, he's kind of been pushed away, which I don't think is deserved, because you see what he's been able to do for LA this season and how good he's been able to return back to form. You can see in 39 games this year, a .216 goals against average, a .918 save percentage. I think he's top 10 now in goals saved of expected. He's truly been the goaltender that LA has needed and has recaptured some of that spark that he had back in LA a few years ago. Now on to the Minnesota Wild, and they're a team full of underrated players that I think deserve more attention, but you knew who I was going to pick. It was always going to be Marco Rossi. If we made a last 3 years underrated type of pick, then Marco Rossi fits that. If we're going on by this season, he also fits that in my opinion. He has been excellent and is having the breakout year that really have always dreamed that he would have. After having a 40-point season last year, getting that production up, this year he's continued to do so, and if he played a full 82 games, would have 64 points this season. He just continued to improve and improve, be more of an influential and substantial player in every single shift, and become more impactful, and that's been great to see. The defensive habits as well are starting to show themselves too. I think for Minnesota, even though there were the trade rumors after last offseason, there is no reason why they should be leaving this guy behind, because he is a core part of that team, in my opinion, has been one of the main reasons why they've rebounded this season and have kept a stranglehold as well in the playoff spot, because otherwise with the injuries of players like Kaprizov, things would look pretty dire. Now we move on to the Montreal Canadiens, and this is a player that might be the best pure player on this list, but I still don't think gets the recognition that he deserves, especially this season. Let's go on to Nick Suzuki, who has been such a leader, such a strong player, such a balanced player in all respects, and continues to lead this Montreal team to greater success every single year. You can see every single season he's been improving in his points and his points per game, going from 41 points in his second year of Montreal to 61, then 66 to 77, and this year on pace for 61 assists 86 points. Do you want to know a big reason why Montreal's in the playoff race right now, why they've been so good and why they've really stuck in this race for so long? It's because of the leadership of players like Suzuki and just how clutch he's been all throughout this season. So good in so many directions and leading the team in so many great ways, especially with a lot of the players like Caulfield, especially, who have been having great seasons. Suzuki is a major part of that. I also debated putting Sam Montembeault as well on this list. He's also having a great season too, but Suzuki, I think, in so many ways has been one of the key reasons why this Montreal team has been so much more respectful than they've been before. Now, going on to the Nashville Predators, there aren't a lot of options here to choose from, players that are actually underrated, because there's not a lot of players in Nashville that have actually played good at all this year. But I did want to give a little bit of a shout to my boy Fyodor Svechkov, who is right now breaking into the NHL. And it's been a slow process as Nashville plays him in the bottom six on a team that isn't even that good already, but I think he's done just fine with the opportunity. In 36 games this year, has 6 goals, 5 assists, 11 points. I think has been bringing a lot of the smarts that he's provided, and I think the defensive game is coming along as the season goes. It was a little bit rough to start things out, but I think he's showing what he is made of. In Nashville this season, there's not a lot of players out there that even qualify, but in Svechkov's case, he's showing that he'll be a future NHLer, which for Nashville, they need any of those players that they can get right now. Now, moving on to the New Jersey Devils, this is a team that I debated because there's a few players here that, if this was a few months ago, I would have said we're absolutely in this spot. I would have said Jonathan Kovacevic, especially at the start of the year, extremely underrated, but I think he's gotten a lot more attention as of late. Same thing with a player like Stefan Noesen, Plano, Texas stud, but somebody that's been especially good since the turn of the year and is not getting credit for it is Jake Allen. Genuinely, I think over the last couple months, the goaltender with the highest goal saved above expected. We mentioned him in the free agency video. I thought he was a really underrated player there, and he is putting himself up in a great season this year of New Jersey. You can see in 26 games, he has a 2.53 goals against average, a .915 save percentage. He started off a little bit lackluster, a little bit just fine, but especially lately, he has kept New Jersey in this playoff race. Him and Jesper Bratt have been just so influential, but Allen especially. Every single game, it seems like he's been getting better throughout this season, and for New Jersey, that is critical. Markstrom's been solid, but Allen's been excellent. Now going on to the New York Islanders, and they're a team that I also think has a few options out there. Simon Holmstrom has been putting up some pretty good numbers this year, and I don't think he's getting much credit for it. But a player that I was kind of underrating and wasn't really seeing as much of a player until what he's been able to produce this season is Anders Lee, who at 34 years old has kind of had a career resurgence a little bit. You can see this season, after a 37-point season last year, he's on pace for 31 goals, 57 points, and that would be his best season since 2018. Especially considering this Islanders team and how inept they've been offensively, it might be easy to just hush away a lot of their offensive performers, but Anders Lee, Kyle Palmieri, they've been pretty good on offense and putting up some pretty good numbers, but Lee especially surprised me by just how consistent he's been. He's been putting up some great moments here and there whenever I've watched the Islanders this year, but I didn't expect the totals he's put up this season to be that big and that impressive. Honestly, good for him. Next up, let's go into the New York Rangers, and this is a team that I debated back and forth on because I don't think there's a lot of players that are actually that underrated on the roster, but one that I kept going back to that I think honestly is getting overhated, just like a Darnell Nurse this year, is Igor Shesterkin. And I get the fact that his counting stats haven't been as unbelievable as they've been in the past, a .907 save percentage, but I think we have to consider the fact that this is this year's New York Rangers team we're talking about, where the defense has been in flux. You've had injuries to Adam Fox, you've had injuries to so many different players, you've had trades, you've had so many different combos and pairings, and it just never really seems to have gelled perfectly. It's always kind of been a little bit of a mess. Igor Shesterkin has had to carry the leftovers from that and has had to carry the load afterwards. And in terms of goals he'd have expected, he's still third in the NHL. And considering his workload, I think that's pretty astronomical. I think especially in Shesterkin's case, earlier on, he got quite a bit overhated. He's been quite solid as of late. He hasn't been the best goaltender in the world this year. I do get that. And of course, with the big contract coming up, you want to see that type of performances. But he's been, I think, good enough under the Rangers defense that has just been not giving him any favors whatsoever. Now let's move on to the Ottawa Senators and go on to a defenseman I don't think gets enough attention as is, and that is Nick Jensen, a part of the big Jacob Chychrun deal, and he was the defenseman going back to Ottawa, and I think was kind of underrated in that deal in a lot of ways. With Chychrun, of course, and the offensive potential he had, he was always going to have higher highs, and we've seen how good he's been for Washington this year. But I think for Jensen, he's fit that Ottawa defense a lot better, and at 34 years old, I think over the past couple of years has been just a really consistent defensive D. This year especially, 60 games, 19 points, and pretty good offensive numbers there. there. But I think in Jensen's case, the value comes from how good of a play stopper he is, how good of a defensive stalwart he can be in the big moments, in those clutch times, and he's somebody that has just always been a quiet defensive force for the Sens team, which is something that they've really needed this year on that defensive side. To me, especially, Jensen has been really impactful, really underrated, and even though he's not going to get a lot of attention because he's not that supreme offensive D, quietly does his job, and every single playoff team needs that type of defenseman. Now on to the Philadelphia Flyers, another physical D that I don't think gets enough attention. Let's go on to Travis Sanheim, who I think has really been developing himself into a top pair defenseman over these past couple of years. I think is more so on the physical skating ability side of things when it comes to defensemen, but he's some of the offensively has been putting up some pretty decent numbers. 44 points last year and on base for 32 this year. But don't get me wrong, the physicality and what he's able to do with it is the most important part of it. And in Sanheim's case, I think he utilizes his size extremely well. He's somebody that is just quiet defensively, always makes the right decisions, and especially for a team like Philly who has been in flux right now with their rebuild and what they want to be, Sanheim has been exactly what Philadelphia wants more of in that defense. It has been critical to their growth, which considering he was maybe in line to be the next Ivan Provorov who just got thrown into monster minutes, he's been able to handle it pretty well. Now on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and we're going to go on to yet another defenseman, this time with Matt Grzelcyk. And I will say I wasn't expecting the type of production until I was researching for today's video. He has in 69 games 31 points, which wouldn't be too bad. It's already a career high for him. He's been doing pretty well in the power play as well. Wasn't expecting that personally. We've seen some up and down moments with him with both Boston and Pittsburgh, especially last year, but he's having a pretty solid year, so credit to him. Now on to a Seattle team that has really every single underrated player that I love. Players like Shane Wright, Capo Caco, even Matty Beniers I was close to putting in this position. But a defenseman on the younger side that I just don't think ever gets the credit he deserves is Ryker Evans, who as a second round pick was somebody back in 2021 I was extremely underrated on because he was an overager. There's always concerns about how much a player like that will actually develop. But in Ryker Evans' case, he's been really solid and has been developing better and better every single year, going from the WHL, the AHL, now onto the NHL level, where in 60 games this year, he has 5 goals, 19 assists for 24 points. He's been a big part of that Seattle defense, and especially offensively, I think has a lot of room to grow. A lot of the smarts, though, that he's carried over as a prospect have been perfectly translated onto the NHL level. He's been somebody that isn't overwhelming in his play, isn't going to ever wow you with any dekes or anything, but always makes the right plays, and especially for somebody that young at 23 years old, that is extremely important to have. Now on to the San Jose Sharks, and like we had with Marco Rossi, you guys probably knew who I was going to put here. I try to go through so many different players, and if Jake Wallman was still on San Jose, I probably would have gone for him, but I have to go with William Eklund, man. He has just been so good this season. Slippery Will has just been so consistently solid, and you can see if he played 77 games this year on pace for, he gets 60 points this season, and you can see he's another player that has just gotten better and better every single year, going from a supreme AHL producer to a solid rookie last year to somebody that has been a core part of that Sharks offense. He's somebody that is just such a great complementary offensive piece to me. Somebody that, especially with the Celebrinis and the Toffoli's, has just been able to get so much from them. He just has so much skill in tight and one-on-one situations. The transition ability is just so much fun to watch. He is just such a fun skill-first player, and it's great to see him work out in that Shark system that has really needed somebody like that to carry the pure offensive load. I don't think he's ever going to be much of a defensive guy, but in Eklund's case, what he's good at, he's very good at it, and the Sharks have gotten a solid player out of that 7th overall selection. Now, moving on to the St. Louis Blues, I wanted to talk about this guy because he's another one that I personally have underrated, especially as I watch St. Louis more down the stretch with them being more and more of a playoff team. I got to give more and more credit to Colton Parayko, who I just continue to see better results out of every single time I watch the Blues. And now, a lot of the reason why I'm watching the Blues in the first place is because I love a player like a Dylan Holloway, for example, who was close to making this list, but I think he's gotten a lot of attention this year. Same thing with the other offer sheet player in Philip Broberg. In Parayko's case, though, I think he's having an extraordinary season. In 62 games this year, 15 goals, 35 points. His goal scoring has been unbelievable this season, but the defensive play has really been the best that we've seen out of Parayko. The most consistent, the most quiet. There has been so little times where he's actually made a mistake or made an overwhelming flub, which maybe has not been the case at times past. He's been using his size even more effectively and honestly looks as young as he's ever looked, which is great news for this Blues team, who has needed somebody as sturdy as Parayko this season to be in the playoff push, and they're going to need him a lot more as well as they hope to make the playoffs this year. Parayko, though, I think has been a big part of it, and on a Blues defense has had a lot of issues and inconsistencies. Parayko has been far from it. Now, going on to my Tampa Bay Lightning pick for the most underrated player, this is somebody that I think deserves way more attention for just how good Tampa Bay has been this season, and that is Ryan McDonagh. At 35 years old, this man looks as good as new, and even though the point production isn't astronomical or anything, on pace for 26 points this year, it's the defensive play. It's been the puck handling ability. It's been just how much of a consistent player in his own zone he has been. He rarely makes mistakes, and when he does, he's able to get back to the play and be able to make a great play afterwards. He is just so mature, so confident at this stage with Tampa, and it's great to see. Obviously was a big part of that Bolts defense, and it looks to be right back in that core already. And Nashville, I think, was pretty good to him, but he's been at an elite level of Tampa Bay and shows zero sign of decline. Now let's move on to another former Badger on the defensive side here, onto the Toronto Maple Leafs, and my most underrated pick is going to go to Jake McCabe. And I think for Toronto, it's hard to really go for underrated players because of the attention that Toronto naturally gets, but I think Jake McCabe is just somebody that has never really gotten the attention that he's deserved in his whole time with Toronto so far. Now, I debated going between the goaltenders of Stolarz and Wool, but I think both of them have gotten some pretty big attention, especially as of late, as they've deserved. But I think in McCabe's case, he's just been such an influential part of this Leafs defense on the defensive side, always making the right plays, denying entries so effectively, and using that physicality in smart ways as well. He's not overbearing. He's not going to make a hit just to make a hit. He's going to do it when it's necessary and provide the physicality that the Leafs have always needed. Especially on the defense, the Leafs have gotten a lot more of a physical direction, but I would argue McCabe has maybe been the most successful for it and has been something that has really changed that Leafs defense for the better. Now we move on to the first year Utah Hockey Club, and there are a few options there that I would say are underrated, but to me, the player that easily clears this by a mile is Karel Vejmelka, who has been extremely good this season for Utah in a lot of key categories, especially when it comes to this flip-flop we've seen in this organization goaltending-wise, with Ingram being great last year for Arizona, but being lackluster this season. Vejmelka has really risen above. He was pretty solid, I would say, in 2023, a 900 save percentage. Last year, I thought was so-so at points. This season, though, he's been one of the critical reasons why Utah has been back in this playoff race, and you can see in 44 games, a 909 save percentage, currently 7th in goals saved of expected. He has been one of the best goaltenders this year, and for Utah, especially with the injuries they've had to the defense, Vejmelka has come up clutch with just how consistent he's been all season long. Sorry, he's actually 8th in goals saved of expected. Disqualified. Now let's get going with the Vancouver Canucks, and to me, my underrated selection for them is going to be pretty obvious. It should be for anybody out there, this player, because my goodness, having him on my fantasy team was maybe the best decision I ever made in my life. Let's go on to Kiefer Sherwood, shall we? What a freaking player, man. This guy is just so much fun to watch. I think he's on pace for the most hits in a single season ever, which is insane. He just goes out there, hits a guy, goes and scores a goal, and just calls it a day. And hey, I freaking love that. You can see in 63 games, he has 14 goals, 13 assists, 27 points. It has been such a physical presence. The speed has been so fun for Vancouver. He's kind of just brought this different element that the Canucks don't really have a lot of in that forward group. Just pure intensity every single shift. And he's another player that if he wasn't there on Vancouver, I would be scared to know about what the Canucks would be like right now, because they'd be, I will say, a lot less fun. Now, going on to one of the last few teams here in the Vegas Golden Knights, they, to me, have a couple options. I debated maybe a Mark Stone. He's having a really underrated season, and of course, when he is healthy and playing. But another Marco Rossi situation, another William Eklund situation. How could I not mention my boy, Pavel Dorofeyev, who has just been so good for this Vegas team in so many ways. You can see as a 24-year-old, he has broken out extraordinarily well. In 67 games, has 27 goals, 43 points, has been such a good power play goal scorer, has been such a good opportunistic scorer as well, but he's able to drive results in a massive way because of it. He's also just somebody that is able to find the extra little bit of space so well, is able to find those shooting lanes, is able to get behind the play and just use that physicality, use that extra little bit of edge to create that space. He's just been such an influential part of the Vegas offense, and one of the critical reasons as well why the offense hasn't had many issues this season. The wing depth coming in was a little bit of a concern, but Dorofeyev has been one of the major bright spots. Now let's move on to the astronomical success that is the Washington Capitals this year, and Do you want me to name the whole roster? I mean, I feel like at this point, Connor McMichael, Alexei Protas, they're properly rated now, but I still kind of see them getting underrated out there, especially Protas, who's been unbelievable this season. But I want to give a special shout out to a lot of the defensemen there. Martin Ferravari has been excellent, as he continues to be. Jacob Chikrin is having a career year in so many ways. But I think the most underrated, honestly, has been Matt Roy, who was a free agent signing going from LA to Washington and just continues to put up great results every single place he goes to. Yet, for some reason, a team like LA decides, hey, we're just not going to want to keep him around for some reason. You can see this year, 27 on pace for 27 points. He's never going to be an unreal producer, but Roy is always so good at the little tiny details that add up in the play, and he's somebody that has just been so influential to that Caps defense, keeping things quiet, keeping things going in the right direction. The passing ability has been supreme, especially in his own zone, escaping pressure. He has been so good at it consistently as a defensive D, and continues to be worth every single penny. Whether that's with LA or Washington, Roy is one of the most underrated D out there, and dang it, deserves more respect. And last but not least, let's go on to the Winnipeg Jets. Now, we talked about it before, a player like Teravainen, who I think is one of the most underrated players out there this season. To me, maybe the most, even more than Teravainen, the most underrated player in the league this year. Let's go on to Dylan Samberg, who, if you're looking at Winnipeg's success this year, Samberg and his revolutionary defensive play this year, I think has been one of the main reasons why the Jets have vastly improved this season, and really does not give the credit that he deserves. At 26 years old, a former second-round pick, I always saw some pretty solid potential in him as a bottom pair D, physical presence, but he has really elevated his game. You can see this year, even though the production isn't amazing or anything, 8 goals, 22 points, he's been somebody that has just been so critical in so many key categories, and quite frankly, I think deserves a little bit more production for it. But defensively, of course, is where Samberg provides his most value with the physicality, how smart he's able to play, how good he's able to move the puck as well. That, I think, has been a pretty clear improvement over years in the past. The confidence with the puck and his ability to create pressure with it as well from his own stick has been pretty important as well. I think for this Winnipeg defense, he's been such a key part of it and a big reason why I think they've improved as well. And I think is somebody that especially is going to be a big part of this Jets defense going forward. But those are my picks for the most underrated players from each team in the NHL right now. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed, I would appreciate it if you hit that like button, hit that subscribe and the notification bell. It helps the channel out a ton when you do, and you're able to see more videos just like this in the future. So everybody is appreciated. Of course, if you guys as well would comment down below your thoughts on every player here, what you guys agree, what you guys disagree with, and from your favorite team, who do you think gets underappreciated the most league-wide? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on that. And of course, make sure you click on this card up here for all my hockey rankings content in one playlist. Should have been with all the hockey fans you guys know online as well. And I will see you in the next one. Make sure you drink some water for me, and have a fantastic hockey day. Goodbye.